Good evening, dreamers. Tonight we explore the Paris Catacombs. The Catacombs are a labyrinthian network of underground tunnels and chambers filled with the bones of over 6 million people. Originally created as a solution to the city's overflowing cemeteries in the late 18th century. To this day, urban explorers map the sprawling corridors, uncovering hidden chambers and forgotten secrets buried well beneath the streets of Paris. Now, before I guide you into dreamland, please make sure to subscribe and leave a comment with a suggestion for next week's theme. Enjoy. Emily's heart was heavy as she sank into her airplane seat. Her boyfriend, Jay, had just ended their 3-year relationship, his words cutting deeper than she'd care to admit. "We've just grown apart, Em." Now, with nothing anchoring her back home, she had a spur-of-the-moment decision to visit her cousin Clara in Paris. Clara's cheerful voice over the phone had been a lifeline.
"Come here,"
she'd urged.
"Paris will fix everything."
Emily wasn't sure if Paris could fix her heartbreak, but the promise of escape and a new adventure was enough to get her on the plane. Stepping out of the terminal, Emily was immediately captivated by the rhythm of Paris. The city hummed with life, bicycles weaving through cobbled streets, cafe terraces spilling over with laughter and conversation, and the scent of fresh bread wafting from the boulangerie at every corner. Clara greeted her at the gate with an effusing hug.
"You're going to love it here,"
she said, practically dragging Emily into a whirlwind of activities. Days blurred into a mix of wine-fueled laughter, long walks along the Seine, and introductions to Clara's eclectic group of friends. Emily found herself slowly letting go of the pain Jason had left behind. For the first time in weeks, she felt light, almost free. One evening, Clara proposed an idea.
"Let's get tattoos. Something to commemorate your rebirth here."
Emily hesitated. Jason had always hated tattoos, and a tattoo was permanent, and permanence felt like a foreign concept after Jason. But Clara's enthusiasm was infectious, and Emily found herself saying yes. They found Pierre's tattoo parlor on a narrow street in Le Mans. Inside, the shop was dimly lit and eclectic, with walls covered in vibrant sketches and framed photographs of Pierre's work. Pierre himself, a magnetic presence, his arms sleeved in intricate ink, and his eyes glinting with mischief. As he worked, he talked about the city and its secrets.
"Have you ever been to the catacombs?"
he asked playfully. Emily and Clara both shook their heads. Pierre grinned.
"There's a club down there, a rave, you know, dancing, locals only. You'd have to know how to get in. A bit of a treasure hunt."
The girls were hooked.
"Tell us,"
Clara demanded. Pierre leaned in conspiratorially.
"Burger King, you know, Saint-Michel. Behind the last stall in the bathroom, there's a door. After that, it's just a matter of following the tunnel. Simple, no?"
Emily laughed, unsure if he was joking, but Clara was already texting friends for confirmation. By the time they left the parlor, matching minimalist tattoos on their wrists, they had a plan. Friday night, they'd find the catacombs. The Burger King was unremarkable, its fluorescent lights a sharp contrast to the adventure promised beyond the bathroom door. Clara led the way, her voice low with excitement.
Oh my god, I can't believe this. A rave in the catacombs.
The hidden door opened to a stone staircase that spiraled downward. The air grew cooler with each step, the sounds of the city fading into eerie silence. When they reached the bottom, a faint bass line vibrated through the walls, guiding them like a heartbeat. The tunnels widened into a cavern lit with strobes and neon. The crowd was a mosaic of people, locals, artists, and thrill seekers. Emily felt the beat of the music thrown through her chest as Pierre appeared, 2 drinks in hand. They danced. They drank. Emily felt more alive than she had in years. Until she didn't. When Emily woke, her head throbbed. Darkness surrounded her, thick and absolute. Her hand instinctively searched for Clara, but found only the cold, rough texture of stone. Her voice was swallowed by the void. She fumbled for her phone, but it was dead. Panic clawed at her chest. The rave, the music, Pierre. All of it felt like a distant memory. All that remained was silence. She pushed herself to her feet, her legs trembling. "Stay calm," she thought. "You'll find your way out." The catacombs were a maze of narrow passages and twisting tunnels. Her steps echoed unnervingly, and the oppressive darkness seemed to grow heavier with every turn. She tried to retrace her path, but each tunnel looked the same, the walls adorned with endless rows of skulls and bones. The air grew stifling, the silence broken only by the occasional drip of water. Her breathing quickened, and her chest heightened with claustrophobia. The farther she walked, the more the catacombs seemed to close in around her. Her throat burned with thirst, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. She checked her purse and found her portable charger, with just 1 bar of battery remaining. She plugged in her phone and turned on the flashlight. The flashlight flickered to life briefly, casting shadows that played tricks on her mind before the battery died completely. She screamed, but the sound only echoed back at her, mocking her desperation. Emily's legs burned as she trudged forward, her hands trembling as they skimmed the walls for guidance. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the stale air feeling too thin to sustain her. The silence pressed in on her, like a weight, thick and oppressive. Every turn felt the same narrow passages, the same damp walls, the same rows of grinning skulls embedded in the stone. Her mind screamed at her to stop, to rest, but the thought of remaining in one spot terrified her more than pressing on. She had to believe an exit existed. Somewhere. She slipped, her ankle twisting as her foot caught on loose stones, or maybe bones. Pain lanced up her leg, sharp and immediate, but she bit down on her lip to stifle a cry. The sound of her own voice unnerved her now, too raw and too alone in the echoing darkness. She leaned against the wall, clutching her ankle, trying to convince herself it wasn't sprained. She couldn't afford an injury. Not now. Her head swam with exhaustion, but she forced herself upright. As she limped forward, her movements became slower, more mechanical. Her mind drifted into fragments of thought, clinging to memories of sunlight, of Clara laughing as they ran through the Paris streets.
I'll find you, Clara,
she thought, though deep down, she wasn't sure if Clara even knew she was missing yet. Time dissolved into a meaningless void. Emily didn't know if she'd been wandering for hours or days. Her stomach had stopped growling, the ache replaced by an empty hollowness that made her limbs feel like lead. Thirst clawed at her throat, her lips cracking with every breath. Emily began hallucinating. A faint light in the distance flickered, but as she stumbled towards it, it vanished into nothing. She thought she saw Clara's silhouette around one corner and bolted after it, ignoring the pain in her ankle, only to find another dead end. Her throat burned as she choked back a sob, too weak to cry aloud. The catacombs seemed endless, every turn a mockery of her efforts. She tried to leave marks, scratches on the walls with a jagged rock she'd found, but she lost track of which passages she'd already marked. Her own signs betrayed her, looping her back to the same corridors again and again. Emily stumbled into a larger chamber, her legs barely supporting her weight now. She fell to her knees, her hands scraping against loose bones. She recoiled, her breath hitching as she realized she was kneeling in a pile of remains. Skulls stared back at her, their empty sockets filled with centuries of silence. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she scrambled backwards, dislodging more bones. Her mind raced. How many people have died here? How many more will? She clutched her wrists, her fingers brushing the tattoos she had gotten with Clara. The ink felt mocking now, a promise of permanence in a world where everything, even life, faded. Her vision blurred, and her head swam as her body reached its limits. She fell back against the wall, the cold stone pressing into her spine. The smell of earth and decay was overwhelming, and her breaths now came in shallow gasps. She pressed her hands to her face, trying to block out the horror of her surroundings. But there was no escape from the knowledge that she was going to die here. Emily's steps faltered. Her body moved on instinct now alone, her mind barely registering her surroundings. The hope of escape had dimmed to a faint ember, barely alive in the suffocating darkness. She didn't know why she kept moving, perhaps because stopping felt like admitting defeat, and she wasn't ready to let go entirely. She thought about her family back home, her friends who had drifted away after the breakup. She thought about Clara and the life she'd glimpsed in Paris, so full of possibility. These thoughts didn't comfort her. They were needles, pricking at the edges of her sanity. Her foot slipped again, and this time, she didn't have the strength to rise. She lay on the ground, her cheek pressed against the cold, gritty stone. Her breaths grew shallower, each one now a struggle. In the quiet, the catacombs swallowed her whole. 30 years later, a team of urban explorers ventured deep into the Paris catacombs, filming their journey for a documentary. Their cameras captured the forgotten tunnels, the rows of bones, and the occasional artifacts left behind by centuries of visitors. In one chamber, they found her. The skeletal remains were propped against a wall, the tattered remnants of clothing barely clinging to her bones. One of the explorers shined a flashlight on her. They filmed her for a few moments in respectful silence before moving on, leaving her as they'd found her. The footage eventually made its way online, part of a short film showcasing the catacombs' eerie beauty. It wasn't until months later that a viewer recognized the girl in the video. Clara, now in her late 50s and a casual explorer of the Paris underground herself, froze as the image played on her screen. Her hand flew to her mouth. The tattoo was unmistakable.
It's Emily,
She whispered to no one, the weight of decades crashing down on her. Her cousin had been found, but far too late.